I want to share with you a role model. Today I have a story of a man called Salva Dut. Salva Dut. Have you heard that name before?
No.
I know you will not have. I'm excited to share the story of Salva Dut. Interestingly, Salva Dut was a lost boy from Sudan, or what we call a lost boy from Sudan, what the Western media calls lost boy from Sudan. He likes to describe himself not as a lost boy, but as a walking boy. He says, even in the book, there's a famous book called A Long Walk to Water. Salva Dut survived. He was a lost boy who survived. He didn't die during the journey from Sudan to Ethiopia, that 3-month horrible journey. He survived the horrible refugee camp in Ethiopia. He didn't die from disease or illness. He also survived crossing the Nile to get to Kenya. He wasn't killed by crocodiles or wild animals, so he overcame very harsh circumstances. And in the Kenya refugee camp, he also survived. He got an education. He's one of those boys who was writing on the sand, working mathematical solutions on the sand. And one day he was eventually evacuated to the United States, where he began to, go through school again and learn a skill. When Salva Dut was 26, he had a chance to visit his father. He discovered that his father was still alive, and he was reunited. By then the civil war had ended. He was reunited with his father, and he paid a visit to Sudan. It was a very emotional visit. But when he arrived, his father was very ill, and the doctors told him that if your father continues to drink this dirty water, remember, it was very harsh desert conditions they lived in. In the desert, there's no water. One of the rarest resources in the desert is what? Water. So they didn't have access to water. Girls and women would travel for distant kilometers every morning to look for water in any river that they could sight. The water was often dirty, very muddy, very, polluted. And by the time they trekked back, right? Oh God, so water was very scarce. Girls could not go to school because they would have to travel distant miles to get water. When they come back, they have to do different things with just limited water. The water was so polluted that it caused a lot of sickness, right? So water is so fundamental for any community and any society. The environment was often dirty. You can't have sanitation and hygiene without water, because water flushes toilets, water cleans spaces, water mops, water, right? You can't also eat food, eat meals without drinking water. So think about how important water is. And these people lacked water. So when Salva Dut reunited with his father after many years of a harsh civil war, and after being a refugee and surviving the journey through the wilderness as a lost boy and making his way to America, years after, 16 years after that separation, he left Sudan when he was only 7, but he survived. He came back and was reunited with his father, but his father was dying. And so he was faced with the reality of lack of water. When he went back to America, he started an organization called Water for South Sudan. And he began to try to raise money from Americans to gather resources so he could go back and drill a well in South Sudan. Eventually, 4 years after, he raised $50,000 that allowed him to buy the large equipment, because in that community, in that country, the sun is so harsh that the earth is so dry and hard. You need a high capacity rig to drill down into the earth, and you must drill at least 400, right? 400, meters deep depth to get to water on the ground, underneath the soil. So they drilled, and for the first time since he left after the war, his village, after 16 years of him living. But mind you, the village has been older than even when he was born. For the first time, a well was created, drilled. They dug a well in his village in Sudan. And for the first time, they saw water coming out through a pipe on the surface of the earth. It was like magic. And life changed in the village from then on. Girls could then start going to school because they wouldn't have to travel for distant miles to fetch water. Women could clean the compound. They could cook healthy meals. People no longer had to drink dirty, brackish water that led to diseases and dysentery and death. People became healthier. The community began to prosper better. And soon, he started drilling more wells in more communities. And by that time, it began to make the tribes unite. Because he was from a different tribe, going to different ethnic groups and tribes, digging wells for them, they began to see that we are better when we work together instead of when we fight each other. So unity began to spread in South Sudan, all because of Salva Dut, who started drilling wells. By the time his organization had been operating for just a year, they had dug wells in many villages and were providing water for a quarter of the population in South Sudan. It was amazing. Salva Dut, a boy who suffered the worst challenges as a child, came back as an adult to give back to his community with a fundamental resource. By digging a well, he got water, and water is life. That is the story of hope, of courage, of service to mankind that Salva Dut's story represents. He's a great role model of somebody who overcame adversity but still had a mindset to serve humanity, not just to live. He could have been in America enjoying a prosperous life for himself, but he decided to serve the people from his country where he came from. It is an amazing story.